The rain fell in thin, icy sheets over St. Moritz, streaking the glass walls of the Alpine resort where James Bond sat alone at a corner table. A low fire burned in the hearth, throwing soft light over the polished surface of his martini glass. He wasn't supposed to be working tonight. Bond had come here under the name Michael Hale, a quiet businessman escaping the London chill for a week of skiing. But habit was a hard thing to escape. He still watched every reflection, every movement in the glass doors, every waiter's step. Outside, snow shrouded the mountains like ghosts. Inside, a quartet played soft jazz. Then, amid the rhythm of the rain, a small detail broke the pattern. A man sitting at the far end of the bar, nervously folding and unfolding a napkin. His face was too pale, his eyes darting too often. A tremor ran through his hand each time he lifted his drink. Bond's instincts whispered, "Something's wrong." He didn't move yet. Instead, he let his eyes drift toward the window, watching the man's reflection in the glass. The stranger's lips were moving, not talking, but muttering. Then his gaze flicked across the room and locked with Bond's for less than a second before snapping away. Bond knew that look. That was fear. A minute later, the man stood, brushed snow off his coat, and stumbled toward the exit. Bond waited 2 heartbeats, then rose. He left a crisp €50 note on the table, buttoned his coat, and followed him out into the freezing dark. The wind howled through the valley. The man hurried down the cobbled street, looking over his shoulder every few steps. Bond kept his distance, 20 paces behind, then 15. Suddenly the man turned sharply into an alley. Bond followed. There was a strangled shout, a muffled thud, and when Bond rounded the corner, he saw the man slumped against a wall, blood blooming across his chest. Damn it! Bond dropped to one knee. Who did this? The man's eyes fluttered open, unfocused, lips trembling. Tell him, it's not just a signal anymore. Bond leaned closer. Tell who? But the man's breath hitched, and stopped. In his fist was a small steel object, the size of a lighter. Bond pried it free, a black capsule etched with microcircuits and a faint insignia, a sun crossed by a black line. Bond's jaw tightened. That symbol hadn't been seen in years. The Black Horizon Initiative, a ghost project buried after the Cold War. A defense network rumored to manipulate satellite optics and climate weapons. Officially disbanded. Unofficially, who knew? He pocketed the capsule, rose to his feet, and looked around the silent street. But he was no longer alone. 3 figures emerged from the snow mist, men in black parkas, their faces masked, their movements precise. Military. Bond's pulse steadied. He backed slowly toward the wall, hands loose. The first man spoke in German. Hand it over. Bond's smile was almost polite. You'll have to be a bit more specific. The nearest man lunged. Bond moved like a coiled spring, sidestepping, catching the attacker's wrist mid-strike, twisting sharply. A bone cracked. The man's cry was swallowed by the storm. Another rushed him from behind. Bond ducked low, sweeping a leg backward, a hooking sweep that drove the man into the wall. He pivoted on one foot, spun, and delivered a rising elbow strike to the third man's chin. The sound was dull and final. The first came back at him, clutching a combat knife. Bond caught the flash of the blade, deflecting it with his forearm and slamming his palm into the attacker's throat. The man staggered, choking. Bond pivoted, caught his wrist, and sent the knife spinning into the snow. In 3 seconds, it was over. breath clouding, Bond straightened, looking down at the fallen men. He pressed his earbud. Bond, to London. I have a body, 3 hostels, and a device. Get me a secure line to M. Back in London, 12 hours later, the Thames shimmered under a grey morning sky. Bond walked into M's office, the capsule sealed in a containment case. M stood by the window, her posture rigid, a thin stream of smoke rising from her coffee mug. I heard about St. Moritz, she said. And the dead courier. Bond placed the case on her desk. He was carrying this. Said something about a signal, and then he died. M nodded to Q, who was already typing at a terminal. The holographic scan of the capsule rotated above the table. Carbon nanofiber casing, Q murmured. Encrypted with post-quantum lattice code. That's new. Very new. Whoever made this doesn't want it opened. M folded her arms. What about the symbol? Bond's gaze didn't waver. Black Horizon Initiative. I thought it was shut down after the Oslo incident. M sighed. It was. Officially. But intelligence chatter suggests someone's reactivated parts of it, a network of private defense satellites. If that's true, whoever controls them could override navigation grids, disrupt communications, even weaponize atmospheric data. Q's tone turned grave. Essentially, they could blind entire nations, or crash planes from orbit. Silence. M looked at Bond. Find out who's behind it. Quietly. I want this ghost buried before it rises again. 2 days later, Bond was in Istanbul, the city of shadows. He met his contact, Nadia Ersoy, Turkish intelligence liaison, at a rooftop cafe overlooking the Bosporus. You picked quite the view, Bond said, sipping thick black coffee. Nadia smiled faintly. And you picked quite the mess. Word on the street says the device you found was built by a man called Luca Voss. Bond frowned. The cybernetic engineer? I thought he disappeared. He did, Nadia said. Until last month. He's working for someone new. Calls himself the architect. A financier. Data broker, ghost of the underworld. He runs operations from a moving base, constantly shifting between the Aegean and North Africa. No one knows where he'll appear next. Bond leaned back. Then I'll find him the old-fashioned way. Nadia tilted her head. Meaning? Bond's eyes glinted. I'll start with the people trying to kill me. That afternoon, Bond walked through the Grand Bazaar, moving with the rhythm of the crowd. His eyes caught a flicker, a man adjusting his earpiece near a jewelry stall. Another shadowed him from behind, pretending to browse rugs. He smiled. There you are. Bond slipped between 2 shops, using the mirror display to track them. He turned a corner sharply, into a dead-end corridor filled with crates. A perfect trap. He waited. Then the first pursuer appeared, gun half-drawn. Bond exploded into motion. He slammed the crate lid into the man's face, headbutt, twisted his wrist, and forced the pistol downward with a Krav Maga wrist lock. The second man entered just as Bond flipped his partner into him, sending both sprawling. The third came from the rear, knife flashing. Bond parried the first slash, stepped inside the arc, and drove an uppercut to the solar plexus. The knife dropped. He caught it midair, spinning it in his grip, and threw it, embedding it in a wooden post inches from the fourth man's ear. A fifth emerged from behind a curtain with a silenced MP7. Bond ducked behind a crate as bullets shredded the silk fabrics above. He rolled sideways, grabbed a broken mirror shard, and angled it, catching the shooter's reflection. When the next burst came, Bond rose, fired twice with the stolen pistol. Both rounds hit clean. Silence returned. He looked down at the unconscious men, adjusted his cufflinks, and murmured, "Tourists these days." Then he found what he was looking for, a phone still connected to a secure frequency. He spoke into it. "Tell your architect. Bond's coming." Back in a dim control room aboard a vast floating yacht fortress, a man in a white suit listened to the transmission replay. His face was hidden in the reflection of the glass, only a pair of pale gray eyes visible. "Bond," he murmured. "I had hoped you'd come sooner." He turned to his aide, a tall woman with cybernetic implants running down her neck. "Prepare the horizon grid. We move to phase 2. "Yes, architect," she said softly. Outside, the black waters of the Mediterranean rippled, as enormous satellite uplinks began to rise from the ship's hull like steel flowers awakening to the storm. The rain over Istanbul had turned to mist by dawn, clinging to rooftops like ghosts reluctant to leave. Bond leaned against the balcony railing of his hotel suite, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, cigarette burning slow between his fingers. He hadn't slept. The city buzzed beneath him, horns, prayer calls, seagulls, but his thoughts were fixed on one thing, the architect. Whoever he was, he didn't just inherit Black Horizon. He was expanding it, building something vast enough to blind the entire digital world. Bond crushed the cigarette and turned as Nadia entered, tablet in hand. Her tone was sharp, professional, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of worry. "We've traced a signal burst from one of the men you neutralized yesterday. It originated offshore, deep in the Aegean Sea, near Crete. But here's the twist. The frequency vanishes every few hours, like it's moving." Bond nodded slowly. "A floating base. Matches the architect's M.O. "Exactly." Nadia tapped the screen. Satellite sweeps picked up heat signatures, irregular, like engines submerged beneath the hull. "You're not looking for a ship, Bond. You're looking for a fortress." MI6 scrambled into motion. Within hours, Bond stood aboard HMS Silent Dart, a stealth submersible disguised as a marine research vessel. Inside the narrow steel corridors, the low hum of engines thrummed beneath his boots. Q appeared on the comm screen, his expression half annoyed, half anxious. "Do try not to sink her, 007. The Silent Dart's propulsion system is worth more than your entire pension." Bond smirked faintly. "Then let's make sure we both stay afloat, shall we?" "Indeed. I've retrofitted your diving suit with a new toy, nanofiber armor lining, resistant to small arms and mild explosive pressure. There's also a microreactive oxygen supply good for 2 hours. And this," Q held up a compact, dart-like device, "is an EMP stinger. Stick it to a control panel and it'll disable any electronic system within 20 meters. Just don't hug it afterward." Bond's eyes gleamed. Charming as always. He looked to the side where Nadia stood suited up in her own black tactical gear. "You're sure you want to come?" Nadia smiled wryly. "You think I'd let you have all the fun? Besides, my orders from Ankara are clear. Assist the British agent in not getting himself killed." Bond chuckled softly. "Then we'll both be disobeying orders." Night. The Aegean shimmered beneath a bruised moon. The Silent Dart hovered a mile off the coast of Crete, its hull barely visible in the dark water. Bond and Nadia climbed into the airlock, helmet sealed, their breathing the only sound. The hatch opened, and the sea swallowed them whole. They descended silently, flashlights cutting narrow cones through the black. Faint bioluminescent creatures drifted past like dying stars. Then, in the distance, a shape began to emerge. It wasn't a ship. It was colossal, a labyrinth of metal decks, turbines, and sensor arrays fused into the remains of an old oil platform. A mobile command citadel, half yacht, half war machine. Bond's voice crackled in Nadia's calm. "Welcome to the architect's playground." They approached the underside of the structure, where faint glows pulsed from cooling vents. Bond gestured, signaling her to hold position. He drew the EMP stinger from his belt, pressed it against the vent's grid, and triggered it. The hum of turbines died for 5 seconds, just enough. Bond slipped through the narrow gap, Nadia close behind. They surfaced quietly inside a flooded maintenance bay. The sound of boots and radio chatter echoed above them. Bond climbed a ladder, eased open a hatch, and froze. 2 guards patrolled the corridor, rifles slung, speaking in German-accented English. Bond whispered, "On my mark." As the first guard passed, Bond lunged from the shadows, hooked his arm around the man's neck, and twisted, clean, silent. The second turned, startled, raising his rifle. Nadia stepped forward, slammed her elbow into his throat, then drove her knee upward in a Muay Thai knee strike. The man crumpled. Bond caught him before he hit the deck and lowered the body gently. "You've been practicing," he murmured. "Better teachers," she said, smirking faintly. They moved deeper inside. The corridors were lined with glowing panels, wires running like veins through steel walls. The hum of machines grew louder as they reached the central hub. Through a reinforced glass window, Bond saw something that froze him mid-step. Rows of technicians sat before holographic displays, dozens of satellite feeds, encrypted data, orbital routes. But the centerpiece of the room was a massive, spherical interface, a globe of light suspended above a black platform. Nadia whispered, "That's the Horizon core." Bond nodded grimly. "And they're running it live." He slipped a small transmitter from his belt and attached it to a vent. "London, are you seeing this?" Q's voice came through faintly. Crystal clear. "This system is far more advanced than anything NATO's seen. It's tapping global satellite relays. Bond, if they sync this to weather modulation grids, they could black out entire continents." "Then we'd better pull the plug." "Negative," M's voice cut in, sharp, commanding. "We need intel. Locate the architect. Extract him, if possible." Bond glanced through the glass again. A door at the far end slid open, and there he was. Tall, immaculate in a white suit, with silvered hair and eyes as cold as cut glass. The architect. He moved like a man rehearsed in control, calm, measured, with a faint smile that never touched his eyes. Behind him walked 2 guards, both augmented with cybernetic implants along their temples. "Begin Phase 3, the architect said quietly. "Let the world feel blind for a moment." Technicians tapped at consoles. Screens flickered, and across the globe hologram, cities began to fade into static. Berlin, Tokyo, Washington. Bond's heart clenched. "He's testing it." He turned to Nadia. "We can't wait." They slipped into the server chamber, but a motion sensor tripped. Sirens erupted. "Go!" Bond shouted. Get to the South Bay. The door burst open, and 4 guards stormed in, rifles blazing. Bond dove behind a pillar as sparks tore through the room. Nadia returned fire with her silenced Glock, taking one down with a clean shot to the chest. Bond rolled out, grabbed a metal rod from the floor, and struck another across the jaw. Spinning elbow, front kick, then reverse knee that sent the man crashing into a control panel. One guard grabbed Bond from behind in a chokehold. Bond drove his elbow back, once, twice, then bent low, grabbed the attacker's wrist, and executed a shoulder throw. The man landed hard. Bond caught his fallen rifle, aimed, and fired twice. Silence, except for the hum of the failing alarms. When Bond looked up, the architect was there, standing behind the glass, watching. He raised a hand slightly, almost in greeting. "Well done, Mr. Bond." His voice echoed through the speaker system, smooth and cold. "You've just proven why the old world fears you." Bond stepped forward, weapon leveled. "And you've just proven why it should fear you more." The architect smiled faintly. "Fear is a system, Mr. Bond. It controls markets, nations, and men like you. But systems can be rewritten. You're obsolete, a relic of flesh in a world built on data." "Maybe," Bond said, "but flesh still bleeds slower than circuits." He fired, but the bullet ricocheted harmlessly. The architect was gone, the glass shifting to opaque black. Then came the rumble, the fortress beginning to move. Nadia's voice cut through the noise. "He's diving the whole structure, submerging it." They ran. Lights flickered, alarms blaring. The corridor tilted as the base began to sink beneath the sea. Bond slammed open a maintenance hatch and led Nadia down a narrow service tunnel. A security drone dropped from the ceiling, red optics glowing. Bond grabbed a wrench from the floor and hurled it with perfect precision, smashing the drone's lens. Sparks burst as it crashed. They emerged into the loading bay, now half flooded. The roar of the ocean thundered outside. Nadia pointed. "Mini-sub. There." But a towering enforcer stepped in their path, a brute of a man, bald, augmented with exoskeletal plating. His voice was deep and guttural. "You shouldn't have come here, Englishman." Bond dropped his rifle, settling into stance. "I get that a lot." The giant swung a metal pipe. Bond ducked, the pipe grazing his shoulder. He countered with a spinning heel kick, but it barely staggered the man. The brute swung again. Bond blocked with both forearms, absorbing the impact. He stepped in, low kick to the thigh, rising elbow to the jaw, then palm strike to the solar plexus. The enforcer roared, grabbed Bond by the collar, and hurled him against the wall. Bond rolled, breathing hard. He spotted an emergency valve beside him. As the brute charged, Bond twisted the valve. Steam hissed out, scalding hot, directly into the man's face. He screamed, blinded. Bond used the opening, jumped, twisted mid-air, and drove his heel into the man's temple with a flying roundhouse kick. The impact echoed. The giant fell like a wall collapsing. Nadia grabbed Bond's arm. "Come on." They dove into the mini-sub just as the docking bay cracked and flooded. The vessel shot forward, lights dimming as they plunged into the Black Sea. Through the rear window, the massive fortress sank beneath the waves, silent, monstrous, alive. Hours later, aboard the Silent Dart, Bond stripped off his diving gear, his body aching, blood trickling from a cut near his temple. M's voice came through the screen. "You saw the architect." "I did," Bond said quietly. "He's real. And he's already testing Black Horizon's reach." M's expression hardened. "We'll coordinate with NATO, but this can't go public. We need deniability. Find out where he resurfaces, and stop him. Q appeared beside her. The data you transmitted gave us partial coordinates. He's headed toward the Sahara Command Node, a decommissioned French satellite array in Mauritania. That's his next move. Bond looked out the porthole, the sea calm once more, reflecting the pale light of dawn. Then that's where I'll be. He turned, grabbing his jacket, the fire back in his eyes. Nadia stepped up beside him. We're not done yet, are we? Bond's lips curved slightly. Not even close. The morning sun rose over Lake Como, casting a golden shimmer across the tranquil water. To anyone watching, it was paradise. Villas clinging to green slopes, the scent of pine and espresso in the air, and luxury boats drifting lazily by. But for Daniel Cross, paradise was an illusion, one that could be shattered by a single wrong move. He stood at the balcony of a lakeside cafe, wearing a crisp linen shirt, sunglasses concealing his eyes, and a calm that came only from years of surviving chaos. His phone vibrated twice, a coded signal. He exhaled slowly. The message was from the bureau, marked Priority Red. He opened it. Meet asset at Villa Nera, 10 a.m. Use alias, Dr. Felix Crane. Target, Project Black Horizon. Cross's pulse ticked faster. The name, Black Horizon, had surfaced before, whispered in encrypted networks, buried in intercepted transmissions. But no file, no agent, no handler seemed to know what it meant. Until now. He downed his espresso, adjusted his cufflinks, and murmured to himself. Here we go again. Villa Nera stood at the far edge of the lake, an ancient, ivy-covered mansion owned by an Italian tech tycoon who vanished 2 years ago. The locals called it cursed. Cross arrived in a vintage Alfa Romeo, keeping to his cover as a bioweapons researcher consulting for a private firm. At the gate, 2 guards approached, scanning his forged ID. The older one frowned. Dr. Crane, from Geneva? Cross gave him a charming smile. The very same. I was told Mr. Donati is expecting me. The man nodded, though uneasily, and waved him through. The air was thick with silence, and as Cross walked up the marble steps, his instincts screamed something was off. Inside, chandeliers glimmered dimly over empty halls. A faint hum echoed, like machinery behind walls. He followed it to a heavy door, slightly ajar. Through it, he saw rows of black cylindrical pods, human-sized, connected by tubes pulsing with blue light. A screen above read, Project Black Horizon, Phase 3, Human Integration Protocol. Cross's jaw tightened. This wasn't just a weapons project. It was something far worse. He took out a micro camera and began capturing the visuals. That's when a voice behind him said, "Beautiful, isn't it? The dawn of a new species." He turned. A woman stood at the doorway, poised and coldly elegant. Black dress, crimson lipstick, a pistol resting casually in her hand. "Dr. Crane," she said. "Or should I say, Agent Cross." Cross smiled thinly. "I assume you're the welcoming committee." She stepped closer, her heels clicking sharply on marble. "My name is Valeria Dorn. I oversee this facility. And you, Mr. Cross, are trespassing in a zone where men like you don't walk out alive." He moved slightly to the left, his eyes scanning for exits. "I'd say the same about women like you. But I try not to underestimate people who look that good holding a gun." Her expression didn't change. "Flattery won't save you." "It never does," Cross replied, and in one swift motion, he knocked over a metal tray beside him, disorienting her just long enough to dive behind a lab console. Her gun fired, a deafening echo through the hall, shattering glass and sending sparks from a console. Cross rolled, drew his own suppressed weapon, and returned fire. 2 guards stormed in. Cross shot the first through the shoulder, disarmed the second with a brutal kick to the ribs, and seized his assault rifle. Valeria vanished into a corridor. Cross sprinted after her, dodging bursts of gunfire, weaving through steel walkways and pipes. Alarms blared red. He leapt across a railing, dropped to the lower level, and crashed through a glass door that led to the lakeside docks. A speedboat roared to life ahead, Valeria at the wheel. She turned her head just long enough to smirk before speeding off. Cross grabbed a nearby jet ski and gave chase. The engines howled. Waves crashed behind them as bullets sliced the air. He veered close enough to leap onto her boat. Just as she spun it violently, Cross slammed against the side railing, clutching it to keep from being thrown into the water. Valeria aimed her pistol at him again, but before she could fire, he kicked it from her hand and tackled her to the deck. They fought brutally, elbows, knees, raw force and fury. Finally, Cross pinned her, panting. "Who runs Black Horizon?" She laughed through the blood at her lip. "You think you're ready for that name? Try me. Then remember it," she hissed. "Dr. Ivan Krieger. He's building gods from men." Before Cross could respond, she triggered a hidden detonator under the console. The entire engine erupted. Cross dove into the lake as the boat exploded behind him, a tower of fire rising against the perfect Italian sky. He surfaced, coughing, scanning. Valeria was gone. Only wreckage remained. Cross dragged himself onto the shore, half-burned, drenched, breathing hard. He pulled a communicator from his soaked jacket and said into it, "Control, this is Cross. I've made contact with Project Black Horizon. Facility compromised. Send cleanup. And get me everything on a man named Ivan Krieger." A static pause, then a voice replied, "Copy that, Agent Cross. But there's something you should know. Krieger isn't supposed to exist. He died 12 years ago." Cross stared out over the smoking horizon, the same words repeating in his mind. He's building gods from men. And for the first time in years, a chill ran through him that had nothing to do with the cold water. The night had the kind of chill that bit through fabric. Berlin's old streets lay washed in pale sodium light, long shadows crawling like ghosts between alleyways. A cold drizzle misted the air, turning the cobblestones slick as glass. Cross walked with the stillness of a man who trusted his instincts more than the ground beneath his feet. The collar of his black overcoat was turned up, a gray scarf hiding half his jaw. Through the faint fog, his breath formed ghosts that disappeared before they could exist. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not yet. But Berlin wasn't waiting. Not tonight. His earpiece crackled. A woman's voice, calm, sharp. "Cross, this is Alice. Your signal's faint. You're in the outer ring. Confirmation." Cross tilted his wrist, checking the holodisplay projected from his watch. "Confirmed. I'm 2 minutes from the drop point. You sure he'll show?" "No," Cross said, his voice low, eyes scanning the narrow street ahead. "But if he doesn't, someone else will." He turned into a half-lit courtyard, the kind of place where echoes go to die. A broken fountain stood in the middle, moss crawling up its side. The neon sign of an old cafe blinked faintly, Coffeehouse Adler. Inside, only 2 tables were lit. A lone man waited near the window, sipping espresso like a ritual. Cross walked in slow, calculating each step. The man raised his eyes, pale blue, sharp, and too calm. "Mr. Cross," he said, with a faint German accent. "You're late." Cross sat opposite him, removing his gloves. "Berlin traffic." The man smiled faintly, sliding a small drive across the table. "You'll find everything you asked for. The location, the asset, and—" He stopped. His eyes shifted slightly, not at Cross, but behind him. Cross didn't turn. He didn't need to. The reflection in the cafe's glass window told him everything. 3 men, trench coats, closing in from both exits. He smiled thinly. "I hate crowded coffee shops." Then he kicked the table. The table crashed into the contact, espresso flying like shrapnel. Cross ducked, spinning from his chair just as the first man pulled a silenced pistol. Thud. Cross caught his wrist mid-draw, twisting it outward. The man grunted, a quick step forward, elbow driving hard into his ribs. Crack. The gun dropped. Cross didn't grab it. He didn't need to. He used the man's own momentum, stepped sideways, pivoting his hip, and launched a tomonage, circle throw. The man flipped over Cross's shoulder, crashing onto the cafe floor hard enough to shake dust from the ceiling. The second attacker lunged with a combat knife. Cross's eyes narrowed. He parried with his forearm, redirected the blade downward, then hit a Krav Maga elbow to the throat. The man gasped. Cross spun him, arm behind his back, forcing him down onto the counter. Glass shattered. Coffee spilled black over the man's cheek. The third attacker tried to flank from behind. Cross kicked a fallen chair back. It struck the man's shin, breaking his rhythm. Cross turned, quick, sharp. 2 steps, then a reverse side kick straight to the solar plexus. The man hit the wall with a muffled groan. Silence for a moment. Cross exhaled, slow. The contact, the one who'd given him the drive, was gone. Only the drive remained on the floor, wet with coffee. He picked it up, slid it into his pocket, and walked toward the back exit. Outside, the drizzle had turned into rain. The streetlight flickered above the alley's mouth. Somewhere, a siren wailed faintly. Then came the sound of boots. Many boots. Cross broke into a sprint. Through the alley, across puddles, weaving between dumpsters. A bullet grazed the wall near his head, sending brick dust into his face. He vaulted over a fence, rolling into a narrow courtyard. Ahead, an old metro entrance, rusted gate half open. He slipped inside. The echo of pursuit followed him down the stairs. Rainwater dripped through the ceiling as he entered the underground, a forgotten tunnel from the Cold War, its walls marked with graffiti and decay. He paused, hand on his pistol. The hum of electricity from old lines filled the silence. He heard the boots again, closer now. Cross took a breath, crouched low behind a steel pillar. The first pursuer entered, scanning with a flashlight. Light. Movement. Reflex. Cross struck fast. He emerged from the shadow, grabbed the man's wrist, and in a single motion disarmed him, rotating the weapon away, forcing the man into a wrist lock. The flashlight hit the floor, beam spinning wildly. Another came in. Cross threw the first man toward him, using him as a human shield. Pop pop. Silenced rounds tore into the first man's vest. Cross slid low, sweeping his leg under the second assailant. Low sweep, hook pivot. The man fell backward, head smacking the ground. Cross followed through, one knee on his chest, and drove a punch, fast, tight, straight into the chin. Knockout. The third man shouted something in Russian. Cross turned his head slightly, smirked. You should have stayed home. Then he ran up the wall, literally, a brief wall-run spin kick, capoeira-style martello rotadu. His boot connected with the man's jaw, snapping his head sideways. Silence returned. The sound of rain dripped through the tunnel mouth like a clock ticking in water. Cross looked around, catching his breath. He reloaded calmly, the motion mechanical. He tapped his earpiece. Alice, I've got the drive. But the broker knows I'm here. How many? Too many. He glanced at the fallen men. Too few left. Extraction. Negative. I'm going dark. Trace this drive when I surface. He switched off the comm, pocketed the drive, and disappeared into the maze of Berlin's underground. Above, the rain kept falling. Somewhere, in the distance, the neon lights of the city reflected red in the puddles. Like blood. Rain hammered Berlin like artillery. Cross emerged from a manhole in a forgotten industrial district, his coat torn, his jaw smeared with dirt and blood. The air smelled of oil and iron. Freight containers stood in rows like sleeping beasts, their metal sides echoing with rain. He climbed out, sealing the hatch behind him, and pressed his back against the nearest container, forcing his breath steady. For a moment, the world was nothing but rain. Then, footsteps. He turned his head slightly. 4 shadows. Silhouettes of trained men, moving with the calculated silence of professionals. Not police. Not amateurs. These were hunters. Cross reached into his coat, removing a compact subsonic pistol. He waited, Let them come closer. The first man peered around the corner. Cross fired once. The bullet whispered through the rain, silent but deadly. The man fell without a sound. The others scattered, shouting in Russian. Spread out. He's bleeding. Cross smiled faintly. If only that were true. He moved like a ghost, crouching low, sprinting between containers. He ducked behind a forklift, slid across a puddle, and dropped one knee into the mud. Another attacker appeared. Cross lunged, caught him mid-step, wrenched the weapon from his hand, spun behind him, and applied a rear chokehold, hadokajime. The man struggled briefly, then went limp. Cross lowered him quietly to the ground. The third came from behind with a blade. Cross saw the reflection in a puddle. He twisted aside, blocked the knife arm with his forearm, and slammed an elbow strike, MP Uchi, into the ribs. The man coughed blood, swung wildly. Cross ducked, pivoted, and delivered a roundhouse kick, mawashi jerry, to the jaw. The attacker collapsed like a marionette with cut strings. Only one left now. He heard him moving, a faint clink of boots on steel. Cross climbed the forklift's side, then leaped down silently behind him. He wrapped his arm around the man's neck, pressing the silencer barrel under his ear. Who sent you? The man's breath trembled. Broker, Berlin cell. We were told to bury you. Tell him I'll dig my own grave. Cross pulled the trigger. The shot vanished into the storm. Morning light filtered through the rain-streaked windows of Vauxhall Cross. The building gleamed cold and impenetrable, like a fortress of glass and steel. Inside, M stood before the operations table, a sleek hollow surface displaying red-marked dots across Europe. Q leaned nearby, sleeves rolled up, scrolling through encryption traces. He went dark in Berlin for 6 hours, M said, voice low. Then resurfaced near the Spree docks. No backup, no extraction request. Q smirked faintly. That's Bond for you. Silence is his way of saying I'm fine. He's not Bond, M said sharply. Cross works differently. He doesn't disobey. He adapts. Q raised an eyebrow. Semantics. Across the table, Moneypenny entered with a tablet. The Berlin cell you flagged, all 3 bodies recovered. Clean kills. But no identification. Their implants were burned. Self-erasing tech, Q murmured. Broker's fingerprints, no doubt. M folded her arms. And the drive. Encrypted with a rotating key, Q replied, fingers tapping fast across the console. But I've cracked the outer layer. There's something inside called Project Black Horizon. The holographic display flickered, showing a black logo, a stylized sun eclipsed by darkness. Below it, text in red. Phase 2 active, target, Biosphere Relay Network. M frowned. That's a satellite grid. Global climate control architecture. Why would a weapons syndicate target that? Q exhaled. Because if you control the relay, you control the weather, communication, surveillance. The planet, essentially. M turned. Get me Cross. Now. A gray cargo vessel cut through the waves. The night was starless. Below deck, Cross sat shirtless on a steel crate, cleaning his pistol with a piece of torn cloth. His left shoulder bore a deep bruise, purple and angry. Beside him, a hollow map flickered, Berlin, Warsaw, then north into the Arctic line. The data from the drive had revealed a pattern, 5 coordinates, all hidden within abandoned research bases. Each linked to one phrase, Horizon nodes. Cross stared at it, jaw clenched. He could hear Alice's voice in his ear again, faint but determined. Cross, London's decrypted part of the file. You were right. Black Horizon's real. What else? Phase 2 begins in 48 hours. Cross looked through the porthole. Dark sea, heavy waves. Then we're already late. The ship jolted suddenly. A blast echoed below deck. Cross leapt to his feet. The lights flickered. Smoke filled the corridor. He grabbed his gear and sprinted upward, the narrow stairwell reverberating with chaos. Crew members shouted, one falling past him clutching his chest. Cross shoved through, emerging onto the rain-lashed deck. Helicopters. 2 of them. Black, unmarked, hovering over the sea. Gunfire ripped across the vessel. Cross ducked behind a container. Bullets tore through the metal like paper. He rolled, sprinted across the open deck, and fired 3 rounds. One helicopter's gunner slumped, falling into the sea. The other turned sharply, unleashing a torrent of lead. Cross dove behind a lifeboat, breathing hard. He looked around, a rusted control lever caught his eye. He pulled it. A massive cargo crane swung across the deck, its hook slicing the air. He waited, calculated the rhythm of the helicopter's motion, then released the brake. The crane's steel arms smashed into the helicopter's tail. Explosion. Fire. The sky erupted in flame and rain. Cross shielded his face as debris rained down. For a brief moment, silence. Then the ship began to tilt. He grabbed a rope, tied it to his belt, and leaped into the sea as the vessel began to sink. Cold hit him like a wall. Salt burned his eyes. He surfaced, gasping, just in time to see the wreck disappear beneath the waves. Above, smoke rose in a dark spiral, the last trace of the ambush. Cross floated, holding his breath steady. He looked toward the distant horizon, lightning flashing faintly behind the clouds. A black horizon. M watched the live satellite feed of the Baltic incident. A white dot, the ship, blinked, then vanished. "We've lost Cross," Moneypenny whispered. Q adjusted his glasses. No beacon. No tracker. M's voice hardened. "He'll surface. He always does." Q hesitated. But if the broker anticipated him, then Phase 2 might already be. "We stop it before it begins," M said coldly. "If Cross is alive, he's our only link left." Darkness. Pressure. Somewhere deep beneath the surface, in a hidden undersea installation, flickered the same black logo. Black Horizon. Dozens of engineers in gray suits stood around a glowing reactor core. At the center, a man in a white suit observed quietly. Silver hair, a faint scar running down his cheek. His eyes were sharp, emotionless. "Bond has the data," said a voice behind him. "Good," the man replied, smiling faintly. "Let him chase shadows." The horizon was never meant to be seen, only felt. The Baltic waters were merciless. Freezing currents coiled around Cross like serpents, dragging him downward into the darkness. His lungs burned. For a moment, he let go, surrendered to the pull of the sea. Then instinct roared to life. He kicked hard, breaking the surface in an explosion of foam. The night was a blur of smoke and lightning. No ship. No sound. Only the ocean's endless roar. He inflated his emergency flotation harness, a thin, black belt expanding into a buoyant vest, and drifted through the dark, scanning the horizon. Then, faintly, a light. Flickering beneath the surface. Artificial. Geometric. He adjusted his wrist compass, activating sonar. A hollow echo replied, "Metal structure below. An undersea base." He inhaled sharply. So that's where they vanished. Cross drew a small oxygen rebreather from his belt, bit down on the mouthpiece, and dove. The deeper he went, the colder it grew. Shadows thickened. His breath echoed in his ears. The faint light below resolved into a massive steel dome embedded in the ocean floor, a fortress beneath the waves. Red warning lights pulsed along its hull. A narrow docking hatch glowed faintly. Cross glided closer, body angled like a predator. He reached the hatch, attached a small EMP pad, and pressed the trigger. The light flickered, then died. He gripped the wheel and turned. The lock released with a hiss. He slipped inside. The airlock hissed shut behind him. Water drained. The inner door opened, revealing a dimly lit corridor, metallic and humming with the vibration of machines. Cross moved silently, water dripping from his coat, pistol drawn low. Every few meters, security cameras pivoted. He slipped beneath one, planted a pulse jammer, and continued. He passed a row of glass panels. Behind them, scientists working under the glow of blue screens. They wore gray uniforms marked with a single emblem, the eclipsed sun of Black Horizon. Through the intercom, he heard faint conversation in Russian and German, the words fragmented. Phase 2 calibration at 74%. Synchronization with polar node expected by midnight. Cross's eyes narrowed. He reached into his wrist device, syncing the comms feed to record. Then he turned the corner, and froze. 2 guards. Heavy armor. Submachine guns. He moved first. Cross hurled a wrench lying nearby. It clanged off the wall, drawing both guards' attention. Before they could turn back, he was already in motion, sprinting forward, silent and lethal. He slammed into the first guard, striking the man's gun aside with a slant parry, Nagashi Yuke, followed by a knee strike, Haizajiri, to the gut. The guard bent forward, Cross twisted behind him, locked his neck, and executed a shoulder throw, Sui Nage, driving him into the steel floor. The second guard fired. Cross ducked, rolled forward, seized the man's leg, and delivered a sweeping foot reap, de Ashi Barai. As the guard fell, Cross twisted his wrist, forcing the gun upward. A shot rang, the bullet hit the ceiling. Cross slammed an elbow, MP Uchi, into the man's face. Bone cracked. Silence followed. Cross exhaled slowly, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He dragged both bodies into a side compartment and closed the door. He reached a large chamber, circular, vast, lit by rotating red beams. At its center, a glass cylinder pulsed with energy, surrounded by coils of superconducting cable. The hum was deep, almost organic. On the platform above, a familiar figure observed the core, Dr. Ivan Krieger. His white hair gleamed in the crimson light. His voice echoed through the chamber. When the sun itself becomes a weapon, the world will beg for our mercy. Cross's jaw tightened. So it's real. He raised his communicator. London, this is Cross. I've located the Black Horizon primary reactor. Krieger's here. Static. Then silence. The signal jammed. Krieger turned suddenly, as though sensing him. His eyes met Cross's through the glass floor. Then, in a calm voice, seal the lower level. Steel shutters dropped. Dozens of guards emerged from both sides, black-clad, armored, carrying shock rifles. Cross's eyes flicked across the environment. Catwalk, control panel, coolant pipes. Options. He holstered his gun and cracked his neck. All right, he muttered. We'll do it your way. The first guard lunged. Cross sidestepped, caught his wrist, and snapped the elbow joint backward, kote geishi. He spun, kicking another in the ribs with yokogiri, then used the momentum to vault onto the platform railing. 2 guards rushed from below. He flipped down, driving both knees into their chests, rolled, and came up firing. The pistol clicked empty. He threw it aside, grabbed a nearby wrench, and parried an electric baton strike. Sparks flew as metal met metal. He countered with a back fist strike, Uriken Uchi, to the temple, then a spinning heel kick, Ushiro Mawashi Jerry, that sent another man crashing into the console. The reactor's hum intensified. Warning lights flashed. Containment breach. Damn it, Cross hissed. Not now. He grabbed a fallen guard's weapon and shot the control switch. Sparks exploded. The alarm silenced, briefly. Then a loud voice thundered through the hall. Impressive, Mr. Cross. But you can't fight the tide. It was Krieger. He stepped onto the upper catwalk, flanked by 2 elite guards, both massive, both moving with the precision of martial artists. I was hoping we'd meet properly, Krieger said. I built Black Horizon for visionaries, not spies. And yet here you are, Cross said coolly, hiding under the sea like a rat. Krieger smiled faintly. A rat survives everything. Even the flood. He gestured. His guards attacked. The first came fast. Faster than expected. Cross blocked a straight jab, then ducked under a round kick. The second came from behind with a spinning elbow, Ushiro Empi. Cross narrowly dodged, countered with palm heel strike, Tisho Uchi, to the chin. They were trained in Krav Maga, efficient, brutal, close quarters. One guard trapped Cross's arm and slammed him against a pillar. Cross kicked backward, connecting with a rib. Pain surged. He pivoted, used the pillar for leverage, and delivered a flying knee, Hiza Toby Jerry, that knocked the second man over the railing. The remaining guard roared, charging like a bull. Cross sidestepped, hooked the man's collar, and threw him headfirst into a coolant vent. Steam burst, hissing like a serpent. Krieger clapped slowly. Beautifully savage. But too late. He pressed a button on his wrist console. The reactor core flared, beams of light expanding across the glass cylinder. Cross looked up. Massive energy surge. You just doomed yourself, Krieger said. Not yet. Cross sprinted forward, grabbed a steel rod from the floor, and hurled it into the control relay. The impact shattered the panel. Sparks cascaded. Krieger turned in surprise as the entire system overloaded. The blast threw Cross backward, through glass, into darkness. Silence. Only the hum of distant machinery remained. Cross opened his eyes. Water dripped from above. He was lying in a maintenance tunnel, half-conscious, pain spreading across his ribs. Through the crack in the wall, he saw the reactor flickering erratically, not stable, but alive. He reached for his comms again. Static. Then, a faint voice. Cross, this is London. Signal faint, are you alive? He whispered. Krieger initiated Phase 2. The reactor's compromised. I'm going after him. He pushed himself up, bruised but determined, and limped down the tunnel. Above, Krieger moved quickly through the evacuation corridors, accompanied by his remaining men. He glanced back, fury simmering beneath his composure. Increase power to Node 4. The black horizon must rise before dawn. But sir, the reactor's unstable. Then it will burn the world awake. Cross emerged from the maintenance shaft into the command deck, soaked and limping, but alive. He reloaded, checked his gear, and stared down the hall where Krieger was escaping. He muttered to himself, "Time to end this," and stepped forward into the storm of alarms, fire, and destiny. The roar of the helicopter faded into the storm-lashed horizon as Bond and his small team landed on the helipad of the Aurelius Biotech facility, an isolated research compound built deep within the Austrian Alps. Snow whipped through the air, cloaking everything in a white shroud. The entire mountain glowed under a violet sky. Below, in a buried complex known only to a handful of intelligence directors, something was being developed, something that MI6 couldn't let fall into enemy hands. Bond pulled off his night vision goggles, frost gathering in his hair. "We move fast and quiet," he ordered, voice low but firm. 2 minutes after breach, the entire mountain will know we're here. Rhea nodded, her compact rifle slung across her back. Beside her, Tanner loaded his tranquilizer darts, experimental tech from Q Branch designed to neutralize without trace. "Cameras on loop?" Bond asked. 30 seconds of blind feed, Rhea replied. "After that, we're in the system, or we're ghosts." "Let's make it 31, then." They cut through the steel doors with a plasma cutter, and the compound swallowed them in silence. The corridors were sterile, lined with reinforced glass and humming with a low mechanical drone. The team advanced with the precision of predators, every footstep calculated. At the first junction, Bond raised a fist. A laser tripwire shimmered faintly across the hall. "Infrared grid," he muttered. "Standard level security, but too neat." He crouched, tracing the laser pattern with his penlight. "They want us to think this is the only one." He tossed a coin forward. It hit the ground, triggering an invisible grid above. Red beams shot across the corridor like a spider's web. Rhea exhaled. "Nice catch." Bond smiled faintly. "They always hide a second layer." He activated his watch's micro-holographic dial. A shimmering field extended 2 feet ahead, just enough to distort the laser sensors. "Stay close." They moved through the grid like shadows, Bond's every motion deliberate, graceful. When they reached the far end, Rhea accessed the main console. Encrypted with Hydra 9 protocol, she whispered. Takes 10 minutes to break. Bond glanced at his Omega, its second hand ticking with quiet menace. You've got to. Rhea smirked. You never make things easy, do you? Where's the fun in that? The moment the terminal decrypted, alarms didn't blare, but the lights shifted. From sterile white to blood red. Bond froze. They know. From both sides of the corridor, mechanical shutters slammed shut. Gas hissed from vents above. Rhea's eyes widened. Knockout compound. Rebreathers. Bond barked. He yanked the micro-oxygen mask from his belt and snapped it on. The gas thickened, a shimmering haze that blurred everything beyond 10 feet. Then came the sound, metal on metal. The sound of machines moving. Figures emerged through the gas. Not soldiers. Something worse. Drones. Tanner hissed. Autonomous defense units. They resembled humanoid skeletons made of matte steel and flexible carbon fiber, glowing red through narrow visors. Each one carried a shock staff pulsing with blue energy. EMP won't cut it, Rhea said. They're shielded. Then we do it the old-fashioned way, Bond said, drawing his Walther PPK. The corridor became chaos. One drone lunged at Bond, its staff crackling. Bond ducked under the swing and drove forward, twisting his torso in a fluid arc. He caught the staff mid-air, spun on his heel, and slammed the bot against the glass wall with a roundhouse kick that cracked the panel. Sparks flared. The bot writhed, but Bond tore its power core from the chest cavity with a sharp jerk. The machine collapsed. Two more advanced from the mist. Bond fired twice, perfect shots at the optical sensors. One fell backward, blinded. The other swung wildly. Behind him, Rhea flipped over a console and landed in a crouch. She grabbed the fallen drone's shock staff and spun it in both hands. Looks like we're improvising. She leapt, driving the staff's tip into a bot's neck joint. Electricity flared, frying its circuits. The thing spasmed and fell. Tanner, cornered by 2 units, used a small device Q had nicknamed the Echo. He tossed it to the ground. The sphere emitted a deafening sonic pulse that shattered every glass panel within 50 feet. The entire corridor rained glass. Bond ducked under the storm, grabbed Rhea's arm, and kicked open the emergency door at the far end. Move. They dashed through into a stairwell just as the corridor sealed itself behind them. They emerged into a massive hall, a laboratory unlike anything Bond had seen. Walls of transparent glass contained luminous blue liquid, swirling like mist trapped in water. Dozens of scientists lay unconscious on the floor, victims of the earlier gas release. At the center stood a single containment pod, its lights pulsating. Inside floated a metallic cylinder no bigger than a human arm, marked with the insignia of Aurelius Industries. The Black Horizon device, Rhea breathed. It's real. Bond approached slowly. Download every spec you can. I'll cover you. Rhea began hacking the central core. But before the transfer completed, a soft, echoing clap filled the chamber. Bond turned. A man stood above on the glass walkway, a familiar, poised silhouette in a tailored black suit. His silver hair gleamed under the cold lights. James Bond, said the man, voice cultured, venomous. Still breaking things you don't understand. Bond's jaw tightened. Lazaro Voss. Voss smiled faintly. You should have stayed in London. This mountain isn't yours to climb. You're funding a weapon that could destabilize every global communications grid. That makes it everyone's mountain. Voss's smirk deepened. Ah, always the patriot. He raised a hand, and the glass pods around the room began to shatter one by one, flooding the air with blue mist. Let's see how long you last without your rules. Bond charged forward as glass exploded around him. Voss descended from the walkway like a panther, pulling 2 curved batons from his belt. His movements were eerily smooth, controlled, efficient. Bond met him mid-step. Their first clash rang like thunder, Bond blocking a downward strike with his forearm, twisting his torso to deflect a second blow aimed at his ribs. He countered with a jab to the jaw, but Voss ducked low, sweeping Bond's legs. Bond rolled backward, flipped to his feet, and drew a breath through gritted teeth. "You trained under Saigon Systems Combat School," Bond said. "Your style gives you away." Voss twirled a baton. "And yet you'll still lose." They collided again. Bond shifted weight on his back foot, launched a flying knee strike that Voss sidestepped by a hair. Voss retaliated with a flurry of strikes, each one precise, designed to exploit microgaps in Bond's stance. Bond absorbed 2 hits to the ribs, then caught Voss's wrist mid-swing, pivoted his body, and slammed the man into a glass table that exploded on impact. But Voss was fast. He rolled off, blood at his temple, and threw a baton that clipped Bond's shoulder. Bond's coat tore, revealing a thin cut. Both men circled each other, breathing hard. "You think you're fighting for order," Voss said coldly. "But order is an illusion built on fear. The Black Horizon will wipe that illusion clean." Bond's eyes narrowed. "Not while I'm alive." They clashed again, faster, heavier, more brutal. Bond feinted left, hooked right, and drove an elbow into Voss's collarbone. Voss stumbled, but in the same motion, jammed a hidden blade from his sleeve into Bond's thigh. Bond grunted, pain flashing through him. He grabbed Voss by the lapels and head-butted him, once, twice, until the man dropped the blade. With a roar, Bond lifted him bodily and threw him against the containment pod. The glass cracked, blue fluid spilled out, sizzling as it hit the floor. Sparks rained from the ceiling. Alarms blared. "Rhea!" Bond shouted. "We're done here." "Transfer complete," she yelled back, pulling the drive from the terminal. "I've got everything." Voss crawled toward the console, blood dripping from his mouth. "You can't stop it. It's already been transmitted." Bond looked down at him, breathing hard. "Then I'll stop whoever gets it next." He raised his pistol and fired, not to kill, but to disable. The bullet shattered Voss's wrist, sending the man collapsing into unconsciousness. The chamber began to implode as energy surged from the containment failure. Bond grabbed Rhea and Tanner, dragging them toward the service tunnel. Explosions thundered behind them. The ground split, throwing them against the walls. They tumbled into a maintenance shaft and slid down into darkness. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then, a light ahead. An opening. They burst through into an ice cavern lit by moonlight streaming from a fissure above. Snowflakes swirled like shards of glass in the cold wind. Bond looked back once, the facility erupting in a bloom of blue fire. He turned to his team. "We're not done. If Voss was right, someone else has the data. We need to find where it's going." Rhea wiped frost from her face. "Then where to?" Bond adjusted his coat, the faintest smirk returning to his lips. "London. Always starts, and ends, there." The snow still fell like fine dust from the heavens when the extraction chopper appeared, its searchlight carving through the alpine fog. Bond shielded his eyes as the rotor wash scattered powder in every direction. Tanner signaled with a flare. Rhea dragged the wounded data core in its sealed titanium case. Bond limped slightly from the cut on his thigh, but his eyes were sharp, fixed on the dark horizon behind them, half expecting another ambush. "Let's move," the pilot shouted over the din. They piled in. The doors slammed shut, and within seconds, the facility vanished beneath them, consumed by an expanding bloom of blue fire that lit the night sky. The explosion rolled across the mountains like thunder. Rhea stared through the glass, speechless. Bond didn't look back. He only whispered, "That's one ghost put to rest." The city was cold, gray, and awake. Morning traffic bled across the Thames, and MI6's glass-front headquarters shimmered with rain. Inside, the air carried that faint mix of coffee, tension, and classified urgency. Bond strode through the lobby, flanked by Rhea and Tanner. His limp was gone. He moved with the same effortless confidence that always unnerved new recruits. But beneath it, his mind was running faster than ever. Every move Voss had made felt too orchestrated. The timing, the location, even the ease of their extraction. He didn't like patterns that were too neat. As the elevator doors closed, Ria leaned slightly toward him. Do you think Voss was telling the truth? That someone else already has the Black Horizon data? Bond glanced at her reflection in the mirrored wall. In my experience, villains don't lie when they think they're dying. M's office was darker than usual. The blinds half drawn. The smell of rain mixed with old wood and paper. M looked up as Bond entered. 007. I trust you brought back something more than a crater in the Alps. Bond placed the titanium case on the desk. Voss is alive, barely. He's in Swiss custody under an alias. But this, he tapped the case, contains the project schematics for the Black Horizon device. M nodded to Ria, who set a small drive on the console. All copied before the collapse. Q was already waiting in the corner, sleeves rolled up, scanning through the recovered files. His eyebrows furrowed. This isn't just a weapon, sir. It's a neural compression system, something that can piggyback onto any major satellite network and reprogram communication algorithms in real time. In theory, whoever controls it could rewrite every encrypted channel on Earth. Rewrite? M asked. Q nodded grimly. Erase, manipulate, or replace data streams. Governments, financial systems, military orders. It could fake a nuclear strike, delete a country's existence, or make it look like you never existed at all. M's jaw tightened. God help us. Bond crossed his arms. Voss wasn't the architect. Someone financed him. Someone bigger. Q swiped through the data logs. The files are fragmented, but I found a name embedded in the encryption. Project Helios. Linked to a corporation in Singapore, Arcadia Dynamics. Front company, most likely. Bond's eyes narrowed. Helios. Ria frowned. That name came up once before, in the Aegean Deep Network leak. Bond looked to M. Request permission to pursue. M exhaled slowly. You're going to Singapore, then. Quietly. No trace. Officially, this never happened. She paused, eyes meeting Bond's with the faintest flicker of concern. And Bond, watch your back. This kind of money doesn't sleep. Bond smirked faintly. Neither do I. Later that night, the city seemed to hold its breath. Bond stood at his apartment window overlooking the Thames, a tumbler of scotch in his hand. The reflection of the skyline danced in the glass. He had spent too long living between two worlds, duty and consequence. But tonight felt different. The world wasn't just changing, it was being rewritten. He took a sip, then noticed a faint shimmer of light on the desk. A coded message blinking on his encrypted terminal. Sender. Unknown. Nice work in the Alps, Mr. Bond. But you're chasing shadows. The sun has already risen. Bond's jaw set. The message auto-deleted before he could trace it. He looked out at the city again, the rain streaking down like tears on the glass. Looks like someone's playing early. Q stormed into M's office, holding a printout. I've run every digital fingerprint on that signal. It didn't come from outside our system, it came through our system. M frowned. Meaning someone in MI6 authorized the relay that sent it to 007. M's eyes hardened. Find out who. But before Q could respond, alarms began to flash across the entire floor. Unauthorized system breach. Level 1 internal override. Bond and Ria, just entering the building, watched as analysts scrambled. Q's voice crackled over the intercom, security to the data center. We've got an infiltration, digital and physical. Bond didn't hesitate. He drew his pistol and sprinted down the hall with Ria on his heels. The data center was chaos, screens flickering, security lights pulsing red. At the center stood a single figure in tactical gear, pulling a data drive from the main terminal. Stop. Bond's voice cut through the noise. The figure turned, mask reflecting the crimson light. For a second, everything froze. Then the figure lunged for the exit. Bond fired a warning shot, the bullet sparking off the steel wall. I said stop. But the intruder kept moving, fast and calculated. Rhea sprinted left, cutting off the escape route. Bond tackled the figure near the stairwell, both crashing into a glass panel that shattered under their weight. They fought viciously, every strike crisp and trained. The attacker countered Bond's hold with a sharp elbow to the ribs, then pivoted and delivered a spinning kick aimed at his head. Bond ducked just in time, sweeping the figure's leg out from under them. The mask cracked open. Bond froze. Rhea, he breathed. Except it wasn't his Rhea. The face beneath the mask was identical, down to the eyes, but colder, more mechanical. Rhea, standing behind Bond, gasped. What the hell? The double smirked. Hello, sister. Bond's eyes narrowed. Clone. Q's voice buzzed over the comms. Bond. The Helios file. It includes biometric replication data. They've been using human templates for infiltration. The fake Rhea slammed a smoke charge on the floor. Thick gray clouds swallowed the room. When it cleared, she was gone. Bond holstered his gun slowly. Well, that complicates things. In the aftermath, M gathered the team in the war room. Bond stood with arms folded, eyes on the holographic projection of the Arcadia Dynamics logo. This changes everything, M said. If Helios can replicate field agents, they could replace anyone, anywhere. Bond spoke evenly. Then we find where they're building them. And we burn it to the ground. Q zoomed in on the data. One of the encrypted coordinates points to a floating facility, somewhere in the South China Sea. A mobile lab platform registered under a dead company name, Lunaris Research. Rhea crossed her arms. Sounds like our next stop. M nodded. You leave tonight. Covert insertion via drone submersible. The facility moves every 12 hours. So timing is everything. Bond gave a short nod. Understood. As he turned to leave, M's voice stopped him. And Bond, if they're cloning agents, if they're cloning you. Bond looked back, eyes cold as winter. Then I'll just have to prove who the real one is. Bond loaded his gear into the sleek black Aston Martin Valhalla. Rhea approached quietly, her usual sarcasm replaced by a hint of unease. Do you ever get tired of this? She asked softly. Bond gave a small half-smile. Of what? Being everyone's weapon. Everyone's answer. He paused, closing the car door. Someone has to be. Rhea looked down, then held out a small silver chip. Q modified this tracker. Works even through signal scramblers. Stick it under the main reactor when we reach that lab. Bond took it, eyes meeting hers. You're a good agent, Rhea. She smirked faintly. Try not to get yourself replaced before I see you again. Bond slid into the car, engine humming to life. No promises. The tires screamed as the Valhalla tore out into the London rain, taillights slicing through the mist like twin red blades. As the city faded behind him, a voice crackled over Bond's secure comm, distorted, familiar, unsettling. You think you're chasing Helios, 007. But Helios isn't a person. It's an idea. A new dawn. And you're standing in the dark. Bond tightened his grip on the wheel. Then let's see how bright it burns when I get there. The voice chuckled. You already have. The signal cut. Bond stared ahead as the rain turned to fog, the London skyline vanishing in his rearview mirror. Somewhere beyond the sea lay the next layer of the black horizon, the place where truth, identity, and humanity itself blurred into shadow. He shifted gears, the Valhalla roaring into the night. The night air in Cairo was thick with sand and tension. Bond sat alone on the rooftop of the Khan El Khalili safehouse, nursing a small glass of scotch. Below, the city murmured with life. Cars honking, merchants shouting, distant prayer calls echoing from the minarets. It was a beautiful chaos, But Bond wasn't here for beauty. He was waiting. For the past 3 days, his team had been scattered. Malik tracing communications through Istanbul, Reyes decoding the chemical schematics in Zurich, and Bond, as always, at the heart of the storm. M had sent only 3 words in her last transmission. Find the vessel. The phrase had haunted him. The same words appeared on every encrypted message tied to Black Horizon. The vessel, whatever it was, wasn't a ship, but something else entirely. Something capable of wiping out cities. Bond's thoughts were interrupted by a soft buzz on his earpiece. Eagle One, this is Falcon. We've got movement. It was Malik. His voice was low but steady. Where? Bond asked, setting his glass aside. Old City District. Near the spice market. The courier just switched cars. He's not local. Bond rose instantly, grabbing his jacket and sidearm. Keep eyes on him. I'll intercept. The streets of Cairo at night were a labyrinth. Neon lights flickered over narrow alleys, and the scent of cumin, oil, and dust hung in the air. Bond moved like a shadow, weaving through crowds until he reached the location Malik had marked. A black Mercedes G-Class idled near a half-collapsed building. 2 men stood guard outside, both armed, both ex-military by their stance. Bond adjusted the silencer on his Walther P99, moving closer under the cover of a passing truck. A flicker of motion, 1 guard turned. Bond fired once, the bullet striking clean through the throat. The second spun, raising his rifle, but Bond was faster. A kick to the ribs, a twist of the arm, and the man's weapon clattered away before a quick elbow ended it. Bond slipped inside the building. The interior was dark, lit only by a few flickering bulbs. Crates lined the walls, each stamped with the Black Horizon insignia, a black sun rising over an ocean. He pried open one. Inside were vials, dozens of them, filled with a shimmering silver liquid. Bond's blood ran cold. He recognized the compound. VX-9 neurotoxin, the same weapon last seen in a failed Soviet experiment. Lethal in micrograms. Then he heard footsteps. A man entered from the back door, tall, with a scar across his cheek. The courier. Bond recognized him from MI6's files. Yusuf Al-Nasir, ex-chemical engineer for Horizon Tech. Bond aimed his gun. Me-6. Hands where I can see them. Al-Nasir froze, then smiled faintly. Too late, Mr. Bond. The vessel is already awake. Before Bond could react, Al-Nasir threw a grenade. Bond dove behind a crate as it exploded, shattering glass and filling the air with smoke. He coughed, rolling across the floor, eyes watering. When the haze cleared, Al-Nasir was gone. Malik, he's on the move. Bond shouted into his comm. Copy that, I see him heading north. He's in a motorbike. Wait, damn it, he's got company. Gunfire echoed from the street. Bond dashed outside just in time to see Al-Nasir speeding away, flanked by 2 more bikes. Without hesitation, Bond hijacked the nearest car, a dusty Toyota Hilux, and tore after them. The chase was chaos. Cairo's narrow streets became a blur of lights and dust. Bond swerved through stalls, smashed through crates of fruit, and clipped the corner of a cart as bullets shattered his windshield. He ducked, spun the wheel, and rammed one of the bikes, sending its rider flying into a wall. Al-Nasir glanced back, eyes burning with defiance. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a remote detonator. Bloody hell, Bond hissed. Ahead, the road split toward the Nile Bridge. If Al-Nasir detonated those crates, the toxin would spill into the river, poisoning half of Cairo. Bond slammed the accelerator, catching up as they hit the bridge. The wind roared, the city lights flashing below. He rammed the bike's rear wheel, sending it skidding sideways. Al-Nasir tumbled off, rolling across the bridge before pulling a knife. Bond jumped from the truck, meeting him halfway. The 2 men clashed violently, the knife slicing across Bond's sleeve as he countered with a punch to the jaw. Al-Nasir slashed again, but Bond twisted his arm, snapping it backward with a sickening crack. The detonator slipped from Al-Nasir's hand, sliding toward the edge. Both dove for it. Bond reached it first, pressing his thumb against the safety switch, and disarmed it just before Al-Nasir lunged again. Bond ducked, delivering a brutal knee to the ribs followed by a head but that sent the man crashing to the concrete. Breathing hard, Bond rose, the detonator in hand. "Where's the vessel?" he demanded. Al-Nasir spat blood, laughing weakly. "You think this ends here? The vessel doesn't sail. It flies." Bond's eyes widened. Before he could respond, a shot rang out from the distance, striking Al-Nasir in the chest. The man fell limp. Bond turned sharply, scanning the rooftops. For a brief second, he caught a silhouette, a sniper lowering her rifle. It was Ilara Voss, the same assassin he had encountered in Venice. And she was smiling. Before Bond could fire, she vanished into the night. He looked down at Al-Nasir's body, the man's final words echoing in his mind. A flying vessel. A plane. A drone. Or something worse. He picked up his comm. "Malik, patch me through to M. Tell her the toxin's confirmed, and we've got a new problem." "What kind of problem?" Malik asked. Bond looked toward the horizon. "The kind that flies." He thought the mission was over. But somewhere deep beneath the waves, the black horizon had just begun to rise.